history of the Old Testament is mainly about how God and Israel lived together after the creation in early civilization eras. About 2,000 years before Christ, God plucked a man by the name of Abram out of the ancient center of the world to begin a people of witness called chosen ones. Abraham and his wife Sarah brought forth a son Isaac, who brought forth a son named Jacob, who was renamed by God Israel. Israel and his wives, yes, I said wives, this type of arrangement was acceptable in these days. Well, they brought forth 12 sons, whose descendants went on to become known as the tribes of Israel, the forerunner of the nation of ancient Israel. This was accomplished primarily through the leadership of Moses, who led them to the promised land at the eastern edge of the Mediterranean Sea. In this 40-year march, God provided them with moral, civil, and ceremonial commands for living together, dealing with outsiders, and worshiping Him properly. At various times in Israel's history, the tribes and nation brought forth judges, prophets, and kings to lead, serve as their people's conscience, and rule. Judges such as Deborah and Samson came on the scene during the time when Israel was settling in the promised land called Canaan. Prophets such as Isaiah, Jeremiah, Daniel, and Malachi arose at different points to foretell and foretell God's messages to not only the chosen people, but pagan rulers as well. Israel's historical traditions tell us of the importance of prophets to her political life. The most famous kings are Saul, David, and Solomon. When they were a unified nation, it was during this time that the magnificent temple at Jerusalem was built. Though the prophets had warned them over and over again, Israel refused to remain faithful to God. As a result, the northern part of Israel was taken captive by Assyria, followed by the collapse of the southern kingdom by the invading Babylonians. In Malachi, the Israelites had recently returned from captivity to Judah and their capital city of Jerusalem. They rebuilt their temple under the guidance of priests and prophets. And this remnant of the exiled people also sought to repopulate the promised land, gain control by driving out the enemies, while learning again how to worship God the way He desired. But it wasn't to be. Except for a brief period of 100 years, ending about 50 or 60 years before the advent of Christ. The end of the Jewish exile is an interesting story. The Babylonians, who had earlier forced the intelligentsia into captivity, were overrun by the Persians under a king named Cyrus. For some reason, he released the Jews and encouraged them to return to their land and rebuild their temple. Many didn't return because they had adjusted and were living well, but enough did. However, as they reconstructed their temple, they also erected or attended local places of worship called synagogues, which came into existence during the exile. They continued this practice even after the temple was rebuilt. Although the priests served in the temple and performed the required sacrifices, worship in the synagogues centered on the study of the law, and the teachers of the law became influential preservers and interpreters of the law. People with questions about God likely turned to a teacher rather than a priest. It's at this time that the scribes began to write an earnest, extra-biblical material that eventually led to an astounding 613 laws and regulations to guide Jewish daily life. From the time of the return of the Jewish exiles through the conquest of the Greeks and Romans, God no longer spoke through human representatives. Priests from the lines of Aaron and Levi still continued to provide leadership for the Jewish people. But there arose a new group of leaders, both religious and quasi-political. This group was called the Sanhedrin Council and was made up of Pharisees, Sadducees, and the teachers of the law. In effect, they functioned like a religious Supreme Court. Most noticeably, however, is the lack of prophets. Malachi was the last of a long line of prophets, including the writing prophets of the Bible. Not a single divine spokesman appeared before the Jews during the years between the Old and the New Testaments. Anyone who claimed to be a prophet was proven an impostor. For over 400 years, God seemed closed to the Jewish people. They heard nothing from God, except silence.